Ladies and
Order.
gentlemen, if you'd kindly have a seat and settle down, we'd like to get started here. If I could just, sorry, Director McAllis, remind everyone that we audio and video record our meetings. So I ask that the board members please remember to turn on your microphone when you have something to say on the record and turn it off afterwards. And we have a limited capacity for on microphone, so please remember to turn it off when you're finished with your statements. With that, Director McAllis.
Yes, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Director Anderson? Director Buchanan?
Here.
Director Colson? Here. Director DeWitt? Here. Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Troiani?
Here.
By phone, completing the necessary paperwork. Director McAllis?
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Hobson, Melvin, Ross, Totten, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. Item number 2 is the approval of the minutes for the October 15th, 2015 meeting. Are there any questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion to approve? Motion by Director Buchanan, second by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Buchanan?
Yes.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Yes.
Director McAllis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item number 3 is a resolution certifying the financial results for the third quarter of 2015. B?
We will first begin with review of the financial results year to date, and then we'll go through the certifications as well as an update on the performance measures and more information on ridership, which I know there's recently been ongoing questions about ridership. So today we will review the year-to-date financial results for the third quarter of 2015, subject to board certification, and also take a quick look at year-over-year performance measures. A comprehensive report of the third quarter results was also handed out this morning. You should have that in your areas. While uncertainty of the status of reduced fare funding from the state has led to generally unfavorable operating revenue performance, the service board's reported financial results have otherwise been satisfactory. At the end of the presentation, I will be recommending that the board certify the results of each of the service boards to be in substantial accordance with the adopted 2015 budget. So let's look at labor data a little bit. Indicates that the Chicago area labor force contracted by 12,000 in September, while employment levels also decreased by 2,500. So this has resulted in a decrease in the regional unemployment rate to 5.4%. The level matched the broader Illinois rate, but still lagged the national average by a margin of just 0.3 percentage points. Year-to-date system ridership finished the third quarter 1.4% lower than budget, unchanged from last month's report. As shown by the orange bars, they look kind of yellow, but anyway, by the orange bars on the chart, September ridership decreased by 0.8% versus prior year after 3 consecutive months of growth. Gasoline prices fell below the $3 per gallon threshold to $2.80 per gallon in September, which probably contributed to some of the ridership slowdown. For the year, RTA system ridership is now flat versus 2014. Looking at ridership some more, CTA ridership is 1.2% under budget, but 0.4% higher than prior year, with bus down and rail up. More on that later when we talk about the performance measures. Metro ridership is 0.4% unfavorable to budget and is down 1.5% from 2014, but that's consistent with the expected impact of the February fare increase. As indicated by the red box, Pace Suburban service ridership is 7.8% unfavorable to budget and 5.3% lower than 2014. ADA paratransit ridership is 1.8% unfavorable to budget, with growth thus far falling short of Pace's 5% expectation. So when we go through the performance measures, we'll talk a little bit more about Pace and some of the ridership. Operating revenue, let's look at that, was $12.5 million or 1.5% unfavorable to budget, primarily due to the lower level of state reduced fare funding of the RFR. So it's being reported by the service boards at the lower level. Fare revenue, however, was at or above budget for each service board. Pace Suburban Service operating revenue was 6.4% unfavorable, highlighted in red, due to the shortfall in reduced fare funding from the state, compounded by lower than budgeted advertising revenue. So let's look at public funding, which shows favorable results to budget for each service board. We're including here the actual sales tax results through July and a projection for August, which indicates a 6% growth over August of 2014. Sales tax continues to exhibit consistent strength. The RET results for August, so that's the real estate transfer tax for August, the latest available, were also very strong. And for the year to date, the RET is now showing 8.1 million or 17% favorable to budget. So that's contributing to CTA's highlighted favorable variance of 4.7%. System-wide operating expenses, there we go, through September were 36.2 million or 1.9% favorable to budget, with each service board reporting favorable results for both the month of September and year to date. As we have reported previously, over 40% of this favorable variance is attributable to lower fuel prices. So let's look at the fuel. A quick look at the fuel slide reveals that substantial fuel expense savings relative to budget continue for each service board, led by PACE, totaling 16 million on the region-wide system. PACE Suburban Service had a 6.3 favorable to budget expense performance, which is highlighted in blue, and that's primarily driven by the fuel savings of 6.5 million. ADA Paratransit 8.6 favorable expense performance is being driven by lower purchase transportation, fuel, administrative, and overhead expense. So PACE continues to realize lower ADA Paratransit trip costs due to improved terms on their most recent provider contracts. At the regional level, favorable operating expenses and public funding more than offset the unfavorable operating revenue, producing a year-to-date net result which was 57.6 million favorable to budget, a 10 million improvement from last month's report. PACE Suburban Service and ADA Paratransit both have favorable net result variances in excess of 3%, highlighted in blue, due to expense performance. So now let's look at recovery ratios. On the expanded recovery ratio slide, it's improved relative to last month's report. On the left, the fare revenue recovery ratio is 38.2%. So that's passenger revenue only. When ancillary service board revenue is included, the recovery ratio increases to 43.6 through the third quarter. So it's labeled as all revenue in that column. In the right section, we show the statutory recovery ratio, so that's labeled with credits and compared to budget. This stood at 51.7% through the third quarter, so it's 0.3% percentage points unfavorable to budget, but remember that this is due to the service boards reporting lower the reduced fare reimbursement. So now let's look at the certification. Focusing on the certification of year-to-date financial results through the third quarter, this slide shows the variance of each service board's operating deficit from the budget. The operating deficit is calculated by subtracting operating expenses from operating revenue, and it does not consider the public funding results. So let's look at CTA's operating deficit was 0.4% unfavorable to budget due to lower accrual again of the reduced fare funding, while each of the other service boards had favorable variances. The combined regional operating deficit was 23.7 million or 2.2% favorable. So accordingly, we're recommending that the results of the operations of each of the service boards and the region taken as a whole be found in substantial accordance with the adopted budget through the third quarter of 2015. That concludes that part of the presentation. Now we're also going to review performance measures, since this is a quarterly report compared to 2014. So the first chart here shows year-to-date regional ridership in comparison to our peer metropolitan areas that we use in our annual peer review. Our ridership compares quite favorably. Year-to-date, RTA system ridership was down 0.1% versus 2014, as indicated by that mini orange bar. This is an improvement from what we presented last quarter. Houston had a notable ridership spike that resulted from a complete reconfiguration of their bus system over the summer to better coordinate with their light rail, which opened its green and purple lines late in May. Houston's rail ridership alone has increased over 18% compared to last year. So what it shows you is that even though there's been some discouraging ridership news for us this year, The reality is that the RTA region has lost far less ridership this year than most of our other peers, and that's despite the increase at Metro. Let's look at ridership by mode. That's the next slide here. So at the service board and mode level, we see some improvement from what I reported last quarter. CTA bus ridership was 0.4% lower than 2014, but you might recall that bus ridership fell 8% in 2014. So although ridership is down, this is a significant improvement from last year's results. CTA rail ridership continues to improve, up 1.4% compared to 2014. Metro's ridership has dropped a little bit, 1.2%, but that's not out of line considering, again, the fare increase that they had. Pace fixed route and Vanpool ridership were down 5.6% and 3.2% respectively through the third quarter. For bus, this represents an improvement from what we reported last quarter, but Vanpool ridership losses have increased. Vanpool ridership tends to be more elastic than other modes and responds more quickly to significant changes in gasoline prices, which we've seen decline this year. For fixed route, Pace cites lower gasoline prices, severe winter weather in January and February, route consolidation, and the elimination of the cash transfers as reasons for the ridership decline in 2015. You should also remember, we looked at this a little bit, that Pace grew its ridership for 4 consecutive years from 2010 to 2013 before beginning to experience losses in 2014. And yes, they've continued into 2015. But, you know, on some of the areas, there's been some bright spots. Ridership on the 3 I-55 bus on shoulder routes grew by 38% in September versus prior year. So customers are responding to that innovative service and some of the improved service. ADA paratransit ridership is up 4.4% compared to 2014, but it is still below the budgeted ridership increase of 5% this year. So the final performance measure slide looks at financial performance results. On this slide, the arrow indicates the trend in the measure compared to last year, with improvements shown by green arrows and areas of concern shown by a red arrow. Horizontal orange arrows indicate a negligible charge of less than 1% measure in the measure. As you can see, year-to-date performance is looking pretty good. Service levels, as measured by vehicle revenue hours and vehicle revenue miles, increased by 2.4% and 0.8% respectively. And that's driven primarily by the service expansion at CTA as well as by the increased demand in ADA paratransit service. Operating costs are shown per vehicle revenue hour and per passenger trip and have been adjusted for inflation. Operating costs per vehicle hour is roughly equal to 2014, with operating cost increases being spread over increases in service hours. But since there was a decline in ridership, operating cost increases were spread over fewer trips, and that results in a higher operating cost per passenger trip. The next two measures look at fare revenue, first on a passenger trip basis and then related to cost by fare recovery ratio. Fare revenue per passenger trip for average fare, it improved by 5 cents to $1.54 with Metro's fare increase in effect since February 1st. The system fare recovery ratio, which only reflects only fare revenue and excludes other system revenues such as advertising or leases, was unchanged from 2014 at 38.1%, as cost increases were proportional to fare revenue improvements. So in summary, we can say that service levels are up, costs have increased but are within budgeted levels, and fare revenue performance is okay despite slightly lower ridership. So additional detail is in those handouts that we gave out, the quarterly financial report, and that was distributed with the board materials. That concludes my remarks. We'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dee. The good thing about the PACE situation is that the fact that they're able to keep their operating costs down. I mean, that's a $10 million offset of their loss of ridership revenue. If we didn't have that, they would have a substantial budget problem. So I think overall we're in pretty good shape. And what you're saying is that primarily it results from the lower gas fare, which is creating that adjustment, I guess. So are there other questions or comments about? Yes, Sherman.
Just one, Houston. Houston has been projected in the last few weeks to become the second largest city in the United States, actually surpassing we in Chicago. So, a lot of what Houston is doing is the improvement to the rail system, but it is population growth. They're growing massively in Houston, and the rumor is they're going to surpass us as the second most populous city sometime soon.
We all read that article, right? Yes. And what they've also really improved, because I dug in a little deeper, is their connectivity points. They're like the light rail to connecting to their bus system. And so they're making a lot of improvements in that area. So that's also going to increase ridership.
Director Totten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There always seems to be three factors involved in the ridership thing. One is we blame it on the fare increase. The second thing is gas prices. And the third thing is weather. And none of those things are really within our control to a certain extent. But to me, there's a revolution coming in transportation, and that's stuff like Uber and Lyft and all these other companies. And is anybody looking at that technology right now to see how we might incorporate it in to help our ridership situation in our region?
Yes. We talked about this actually, I think, a couple of board meetings ago. It's something that we are actually starting to work on. We have actually already had a couple of discussions with Lyft, the company that's a competitor to Uber. But Lyft is very much playing in the public transportation space and wanting to be a lot more cooperative and sort of coordinating in their efforts. Lyft actually has partnered, for example, with Dallas, and are actually doing some of in their outer lying suburban areas, some of those last couple of mile connection trips by partnering with the transit agency. And these are some of the things that we're actually begun some conversations with them on. I know Pace has had some conversations. There's the Ubers and the Lyfts that get a lot of media coverage and publicity, but there's other smaller groups that are interested in actually partnering with public agencies to provide these kinds of services. And so these are some things we absolutely are exploring. We're not going to have answers to all of this tomorrow. There has to be sort of a critical mass and a critical need to do some of this, but we are absolutely exploring it.
Let me ask you this. Do you know if Uber was to pick me up from O'Hare and drive me to my home in Elgin, what is the fare versus taking American Taxi or somebody else? Is it competitive?
Well, right now, I still believe you cannot be picked up at O'Hare by Uber or Lyft. I think they're actually...
Yeah, no, you can.
You have to get outside the main part of the area. Their prices typically are a little less than, say, a suburban taxi company. But it's a flexible fare, so you might get a quote today, and if you hit O'Hare at 5 or 6 o'clock tonight, and it's peak, they bump into peak period pricing, and it kind of could be 2-3 times more expensive. So I mean, it's truly market driven. They have complex pricing formulas, so it's sort of up to the minute pricing, whereas the traditional taxi companies will give you a fixed flat rate fare, especially with airport.
So what
charges.
you're saying, it is competitive.
It can be competitive, but there are some, sometimes it may not be.
I think that they can now pick up at O'Hare at certain points.
You've got to go to the outer areas, yes.
No, at the terminal.
Yeah, the third.
At the end of the terminal or something like that, they got set pickup points. Okay, I just think that it depends on these other factors all the time, when we ought to be looking someplace down the road to see what else we can do.
We're absolutely.
I appreciate the fact that you're doing that.
It's a lot of work in the planning space right now, and I think I mentioned at the last board meeting, a couple of us were out at the American Public Transportation Association National Conference, and I would say half of the conference topics were dedicated to this sort of shared mobility, this sort of broader mobility ecosystem that we're all existing with. People had been, even just 6 months ago, people were saying, oh, that's the future, but it's not the future. It's here, it's now. People are using it, and and it's here to stay in some form. It's going to evolve, and we should be part of that conversation.
Pace usually does another subject, a pretty good job of auditing its routes, I think, as to whether we should cancel a route or reduce service or stuff like that. I think they do a pretty good job. But I'm familiar with one route that goes from Elgin to Woodfield. and I see it every day. It runs every half hour. There's very few, there is passengers on it, but not a lot. And my question was, if they're talking about expenses and ridership, why are they running every half hour on a route that's good but not worth it when you look at the number of passengers who are on each bus? And I don't know, I'm sure there's other routes around the suburbs like that, but it seems to me that it's one route that deserves a audit from let's cut service instead of every half hour, every hour, or every 2 hours or something like that. Just a point.
Thank you. Maybe that's something, Ann, you can talk to TJ about, that particular line.
Absolutely, and they've actually got a longer-term plan. If anyone's been out in that area, I-90 is under construction. They actually have some pretty significant plans for enhanced service that'll run more express from the Elgin Market into the Schaumburg and even into the Rosemont area. So actually, once those I-90 construction projects finish, they'll actually be revamping that whole larger corridor in terms of the services that they provide. But I'll touch base with him specifically on that.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, we need to have a vote on the resolution certifying the financial results for the third quarter of 2015. Is there a motion? Motion by Director DeWitt, second by Director Buchanan. Roll call.
Director Buchanan?
Yes.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Aye.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item number 4 is a discussion of the RTA 2016 agency budget. B and Leanne, probably.
I will be introducing Bill Lackman, our budget and investment pension manager, who will be actually doing the presentation. But I wanted to just say a few words. Nora works on our RTA agency budget, no small feat. We continue to try to contain our costs and reduce our costs, and you'll see that shortly, so that we can make more money available to the service boards. Further, we continue to stay significantly lower than the administrative cap that is set by the RTA Act, and we will show you that as well. And we're in a period of transition. You know, you've heard a little bit about the mobility management program, and we're working through that in 2016, where there will be some overlap. As we get through the period, we'll know more. But with no further ado, Bill Lackman will be presenting you the agency budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. As we mentioned, today I'm going to present to you an overview of the proposed 2016 RTA agency budget. This item is presented for discussion purposes only. No action is requested at this time. On December 17th, the Finance Committee will consider the proposed 2016 RTA agency budget as part of the proposed consolidated RTA regional budget. No, that's a board meeting at which it's approved. Again in 2016, RTA staff followed a priority-based budgeting approach. The framework for developing the proposed budget was the Regional Strategic Plan adopted by the RTA Board in August of 2013. Each department first defined its priorities through a set of key initiatives and action plans corresponding to the goals and objectives outlined in the strategic plan. Then resources were allocated to support these initiatives. This approach aligns the RTA agency's budget with the RTA's mission within the region. The proposed agency budget for 2016 totals $35.2 million. The RTA agency budget was developed in two parts, the administrative part and the regional programs part. We divide the budget this way to ensure that we meet the requirement in the RTA Act that places a cap on the agency's expenses. The agency administrative budget includes expenses for agency staff, facilities, information technology, and professional services, that support the funding, planning, and oversight mission of the RTA. In 2016, the proposed agency budget accounts for 50.5% of total agency expenses, or $17.7 million. This amount is 21.8% below the 2016 administrative cap of $22.7 million that is allowed by the RTA Act. On the other hand, the proposed regional programs budget supports services provided directly to the public. Regional services include ADA paratransit certification, mobility management and travel training, the Travel Information Center, the RTA Customer Service Center, free and reduced fare programs, and the RTA Transit Benefit Program. The regional programs budget also includes all of the RTA's grant-funded projects and RTA-funded regional studies and initiatives. The proposed regional programs budget comprises the remaining 49.5%, or $17.4 million, of the proposed 2016 agency budget. The proposed 2016 agency budget is supported by $32.3 million of regional public funding from the RTA sales tax. This amount represents an 8.5% or $3 million decrease from the 2015 agency budget and allows the RTA to allocate more funds to the service boards. Most of this reduction resulted from lower expenditures for the Travel Information Center. In 2016, federal and state funding of $2 million also supports the agency budget. This amount represents a 68.4% or $4.2 million reduction from the 2015 agency budget and is due to a lower level of federal Section 5310 funding. Some of the 5310 projects programmed in 2015 will be performed in 2016. The total agency expenses of $35.2 million are expected to decrease by 16.7%, or $7.1 million. Thus, the proposed 2016 agency expense budget is balanced with the expected level of funding. This slide compares the proposed 2016 administrative and regional programs budgets to the 2015 adopted agency budget. The 2016 administrative budget decreases by 5.1%, or $1 million. This reduction reflects lower legal expenditures for our successful sales tax litigation efforts. The 2016 regional programs budget decreases by 12.4%, or $2 million. As I mentioned before, much of this reduction results from lower expenditures for the RTA Travel Information Center. Therefore, the total proposed agency budget of $32.3 million is expected to decrease by 8.5%, or $3 million. Total agency headcount is budgeted to decline from 121 in 2015 to 119 in 2016. The proposed 2016 agency budget also includes a merit-based salary increase for RTA staff that will average 3%. In 2016, budgeted funding and revenues totaled $35.2 million. 91.9%, or $32.3 million of this, comprises the regional funding from the RTA sales tax. The remaining 8.1%, or $2.9 million, comprises federal and state grants and other revenue. Agency expenses also totaled $35.2 million. Administrative costs account for 50.5%, or $17.7 million, and regional services account for 40.6%, or $16.3 million. Grant and RTA-funded projects account for the remaining 8.9%, or $3.1 million. For many of these projects, the RTA acts as an advocate and granting agency, receiving funds for the region and then administering grants to the service boards, municipalities, counties for planning projects. The next set of slides highlights some of the initiatives included in the 2016 proposed agency budget. The initiatives are outlined by the goals of the RTA strategic plan. The first goal is to provide valuable, reliable, accessible, and attractive transportation options. Specific 2016 agency initiatives that support this goal include the following: managing the transition to the new RTA Integrated Mobility Management Program, streamlining customer service efforts by stationing mobility outreach coordinators at senior centers and social service organizations throughout the RTA region, and co-locating RTA Fare Program Assistance Centers at 4 Chicago Department of Family and Support Services sites. Implementing access to transit improvements at the local level and funding pedestrian infrastructure projects in 11 communities to make transit more accessible and easier to ride. Administering IDOT's Older Adult Transportation Project to develop methods to encourage older adults to ride fixed route service. Managing the implementation of the Transit Signal Priority Project. Expanding and maintaining the RTA interagency signage program, and also performing program and project management of the RTA's Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement Program and the federally funded Job Access Reverse Commute, New Freedom, and Section 5310 programs. The second goal of the RTA strategic plan is to ensure financial viability. Specific agency initiatives in 2016 that support this goal include the following: developing a 10-year capital program vision and funding plan to address long-term capital and operating needs. Monitoring and managing the agency's investment assets and debt service levels. Assisting in prioritization of regional capital investments through the Capital Asset Condition Assessment and Capital Optimization Support Tool projects. Working with IDOT and the service boards to achieve efficient processing of capital grants and capital program revisions. Continuing to pursue RTA litigation against sales tax avoiders. Implementing an e-procurement portal to improve vendor management and information distribution, and also identifying sustainable funding sources for coordinated, community-based paratransit systems. The third goal of the strategic plan is to promote a green, livable, and prosperous RTA region. Specific 2016 RTA initiatives that support this goal include the following: promoting the RTA's Ride On consumer marketing campaign to grow transit ridership, completing a countywide transit marketing campaign in DuPage, participating in marketing campaigns to promote transit, including Earth Day, International Car Free Day, National Dump the Pump Day, Stand Up for Transit, and APTA's Where Public Transit Goes, Communities Grow. Supporting 10 planning projects in 8 municipalities as part of the RTA Community Planning Program. Applying the Transit Access Index to measure how many jobs can be reached by transit throughout the region during rush hour periods. And lastly, developing the right size parking tool to calculate parking needs in transit-oriented developments. The fourth and final goal of the RTA strategic plan is to continue to advocate and be a trusted steward of public transportation. Specific 2016 agency initiatives that support this goal include the following: producing targeted and unified RTA messaging for communications to the public, to the media, and to stakeholders. Implementing the Greater Chicago Mass Transit Transparency and Accountability Portal, also known as SHITAP, in order to increase the transparency of the RTA and service boards to the public. Advancing the Getting America to Work campaign to increase funding for state of good repair projects. And lastly, engaging in transit policy dialogue at the local, regional, state, and also at the federal levels, and participating in the CMAP policy and transportation committees. That concludes my presentation. Again, no action is required today. As a reminder, the service boards will present their budgets to the Finance Committee on December 3rd. The proposed RTA agency budget and the service boards will then come before the Finance Committee for board adoption on December 17th. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the proposed 2016 RTA agency budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. A good presentation and a good budget. I mean, you've made adjustments. The budget's down considerably, which is great, including head count is down, which for most agencies is tough to do, including this one, I'm sure. Overall, a budget that we ought to be proud of and be ready to hopefully vote on, as you said, at the December 17th meeting. It's not today. Today's for discussion to get things out in the open and talk about. Are there questions or comments? Director Lewis.
Just had one question. I know we talked in the past about the responsibility that the RTA might have if the budget's not passed in Springfield for supporting with short-term borrowings or other kinds of financial measures we might put in place. Is there any impact on the budget or anticipated impact on the budget if we have to take on those responsibilities that's been built into these numbers?
Director Lewis, of course, yes, there would be. Certainly, the RTA is committed to addressing funding delays. And, you know, we presented to you the strategic financial plan, and we're working towards that. With next, in the December board meeting, we will come before you and look at implementing the first phase of that, which is the direct placement. And then we're looking at replacing our commercial paper with the direct placement, and also down the line our working cash notes. But again, that addresses delays in funding, not structural deficits or funding that isn't coming. So while we are hopeful and expecting that we will be funded at the levels that we have proposed in our budget, should that change, as we've said all along, despite, you know, efficiencies and expense reductions and so forth, the service boards would have to entertain service reductions, fare increases, and other. We'd all have to go back and do budget amendments and come before this board and present those. But, you know, the alternative was to not pass a budget. So we have our budgets. We will be presenting them in December for your passage. But yes, we would have to come back and do budget amendments if anything significantly was reduced.
I may have asked the question improperly. I was just wondering, was there anything in terms of any cost associated with a financing vehicle like, that element, not necessarily the budget. I understand that part, but just wondered if there's any cost elements that might be associated with securing those commercial paper programs or other things that might be reflected in the budget. That was my question.
We have budgeted for them. Certainly, the more we borrow, and we will have a state delinquency slide and the cost of borrowing a little bit later in the ED report. But yes, I mean, in one way, we're replacing our commercial paper with a direct placement. So we already, had that, and we're hoping that is actually, and it will be lower cost than the commercial paper. We have $225 million outstanding on the working cash notes. We're going to reduce that to $150, but we're going to replace it with other things. So we've already budgeted for that. So there really isn't a change other than we incur costs whenever we hit those things. Yeah.
If I could just follow that up. Debt service, both for long-term debt and short-term debt, is included in the RTA regional budget. So you will see that in December.
And that was what kind of prompted my question when I saw that, making sure that we allocated for the marginal cost of what we might have to do, understanding it's a separate issue than the budget that we'd have to actually approve if in fact the funding didn't come from the state. So I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Colson.
You mentioned the sales tax litigation. Can you think of any way to quantify the impact that that lawsuit has had on sales tax receipts?
We did a
Hopefully we'll get more in than, the cost of the lawsuit at some point.
We actually did a presentation a couple months ago for the board. Outside counsel came in and gave you an update, and we talked specifically about dollars and cents and the increased revenue that we've seen that can only be attributed to the sales tax litigation. There are different estimates about what that amount actually is, but it's in the multiple millions of dollars. So yes, we have more than covered the cost of the litigation.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Director Melvin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo Chairman McAllis's comments. Great presentation. Thank you. It's very clean, easy to follow. I just have a question about the $4 million in federal funding. Can you tell us about that? Is that a permanent decrease? Is that just a flow of funds issue, or just what is it, please? Thank you.
Well, excuse me? So the 5310 funding that is declining in 2016, a lot of what was programmed in 2015 the work will actually occur in 2016. So I'm not an expert on federal funding, but at least as it's reflected in our budget, it's a matter of when the work was done versus when the funds were programmed.
It's a flow of funds, and 5310 monies came about under MAP 21, which was the last transportation bill. So we've been the recipient, or the region has been the recipient and the beneficiary of those dollars. They're already sort of in-house. Now the rest of the work plays out into next year.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to the staff. Jeremy's not here today, but when Jeremy and myself and Leanne and anyone else that goes with us.
He's in Springfield too.
Tries to make our case to Springfield and to Washington. It allows us to present a very good case that we're excellent stewards of the management of mass transit monies. And because the RTA internally has its staff house in order, it's easier in theory to get grants from Washington and Springfield, which benefits our riders, which is really what we're all about. And so very nice job on the budget. It makes those of us who have to go to Washington and Springfield to make our case on behalf of mass transit a lot easier. So thank you very much. It's really good.
Yes, Member DeWitt.
I would just echo very responsible budget this year, given political climate. I recall the conversation about the litigation update. I recall much less specific information about what the direct effect from a revenue standpoint has been with regards to that litigation. I would just be interested, if possible, maybe a brief overview from finance regarding what that number may look like within the confines of this proposed budget for 2016.
I've actually drafted a written report that shows what the estimates are for what the increased revenue has been to the region as a result of the sales tax litigation, so I'm happy to share that with you again.
Other comments or questions? If not, a reminder that December 3rd, Finance will be meeting with the service boards at 9 o'clock. It's really important that if you could be here, that'd be great. It's a great opportunity to hear firsthand from the service boards what they're doing with their budgets and what their goals are. And at that time, I would think we still will not have a state budget, so we'll have still a budget that has a lot of uncertainties in it, because if funding doesn't come out of the state later on, we're going to have to address that budget concern. But the third would be the presentation of the budgets as requested by this board to the various service boards. B, you have any other comments about that December 3rd meeting? I mean, everybody will be here.
No, other than, we hear what your inquiries are throughout the year, and we share with the service board, what kinds of things to anticipate, what you might have or require more information on. So it should go very smoothly. They always come very prepared, and they cover their budgets in details. So I hope you will be able to attend, because it is an opportunity for them to present and for you to ask any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, could we have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Director Anderson, second by Director Buchanan. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Committee adjourned.